And we can get started. And let us pray. And I'm not sure who wrote this prayer. I'll back up and say hello to anyone who is watching this after the fact. I'm so glad to know that there are folks who are following along with us. Let us pray. God of wisdom and groundedness, you have encouraged us to live our lives grounded in faith, patience, and love. Help us to love others without judgment, but with a solid foundation of acceptance for the sake of Jesus Christ. Amen.
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 That's nice.
Yeah. I find these prayers and then I forget when I found them. So I like to attribute when I sometimes that doesn't happen. Oh, good. Here come Chuck and Jackie. Okay.
That's great.
We'll wait 1 second.
Sure. Maybe the cat with him this morning too.
Egg, we can only hope.
I always enjoyed the cat.
That's what I always tell them. Hey, Chuck.
Good morning. Sorry I'm late.
No, we're
Morning,
still
Chuck.
getting started. I had trouble getting on myself, so all's well. Are your ladies joining us?
No, they are not. At least one of them's not. Bunch of appointments today, so
Understood.
one of those days.
Yeah, but we, perhaps our female friend will chime in. We can only hope. All right, here we go. So today, I believe we are going to wrap up the Sermon on the Mount. We only have a little bit left in Matthew 7. And so I thought that would be good to kind of tie a bow on that before moving on to the next section of Matthew's gospel. I think I said when we began this adventure with Matthew that Matthew is chunked into 5 major sections. And next week, I think it would be smart to revisit that and just show which chapters are in which section. And just as we've talked about before with the connection with Moses, these 5 sections are meant to emulate at least the 5 books of Torah, of the Pentateuch. And so at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, that is really considered the end of that first book of Matthew's Gospel. So it'll be a good time for us to look back and sort of tie some bows before going forward. Couple of things I just wanted to say. So today we'll begin with Jesus telling us to enter through the narrow gate, and I'll be eager to have that conversation with you all. And I put this picture up here. This is not a gate. This is a doorway. This is in Bethlehem. This is my friend Vicky.
Not our best angle.
I know. Well, sir, thank you very much.
You know that, Fred.
The point of it is, to get this image, because we don't have, I was trying to find pictures of first century gates, and certainly the gates around the old city of Jerusalem have all been torn down and replaced, so we don't have that visual, but this is as close as I could come. This is in Bethlehem at the Church of the Nativity, and it's called the door of humility. And you see the point is that you have to bow down to go into the church. You can't, most regulation size people, adults, can't walk through upright. It's not the same thing as the narrow gate, but it gives the idea of it not just being open wide for everyone to flow through. And we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. And then I also just wanted to share a couple of verses from Deuteronomy, which will provide a backdrop for the end of Jesus's teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. So this verse comes, Moses has just delivered the 10 commandments to the people of Israel. And so they are quoted as saying to him, "Go near, you yourself, go near to God, and hear all that the Lord our God will say. Then tell us everything that the Lord our God tells you, and we will listen and do it." So this idea about hearing and listening. And then elsewhere in Deuteronomy, Moses says, if you will not obey the Lord your God by diligently observing all his commandments and decrees that I am commanding you today, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. And then there's a whole series of curses enumerated. And one of them is you shall build a house, but not live in it. So this idea about building the house as metaphor for the life with God. So I just put that out there as sort of backstory before we try to wrap up chapter 7. Does anyone want to revisit anything that we talked about last week? Last week, we got as far as the golden rule, and we talked about how the so-called golden rule, how most, if not all, of the major world religions have some variant on this. Did anyone want to revisit any of that? Okay. Then I'm going to do something really radical and suggest that we hear the rest of chapter 7 all as a piece, and then we can kind of pull it apart as we need to. So would somebody be willing to read 13 through 29 for us? And of course, I'll scroll.
I'd be happy to. I haven't been able to for the last few weeks.
Can you see it okay?
Yes, great.
You're in good voice. You're
I
sounding
finally have a voice back. It's
Yeah.
wonderful.
all right. So I will scroll when you're ready.
Okay. So enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road is easy that leads to destruction, and there are many who take it. For the gate is narrow and the road is hard that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns, or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits.
Let me scroll up for you. There you go.
Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name? Then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Go away from you, you who behave lawlessly. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Now when Jesus had finished saying these words, the crowd were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as their scribes.
Thank you, Ellie. And so with that last verse, those last two verses wrap up the Sermon on the Mount that began, of course, with the Beatitudes and continued through some of the other teachings, the Lord's Prayer, and now these instructions at the end. So before we talk about the whole of the Sermon on the Mount, what do you want to look at on this end section from the narrow gate down through hearers and doers? These are familiar.
guess
Oh, go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that starting with the narrow gate is kind of a downer for me in the sense that, sorry guys, there are only a few of you. I mean, it sounds very Presbyterian or whatever, but, I like to think of the gate being open and everybody gets a choice to go through, but, so I mean, that's just my reaction to the narrow gate part.
Well, that's a great place to start, John, and I'm glad you said that. let's unpack that narrow gate a little bit. What is he saying there in those couple of verses? Or how do you all hear what he's saying?
What I hear is not so much that the selection process is that difficult, is that, many apply to the college, but only 5% will accept it. I think it's more your own personal journey
Hmm,
is confined, constricted, hard work to get to the life that he's promising.
hmm.
You have to work at it. You can't just sort of stroll in.
I'm reminded of that quote from Bonhoeffer I cite all the time about warning against cheap grace. And I'm hearing some of that in what you're saying, Ellie, that, it's not, that it's a challenge, that listening and following and hearing and doing the words that Jesus is teaching is more challenging than just strolling through, as you say.
And not to say that to forestall Fred, that that
I'm making an impression.
that
I'm
I
having
have
acolytes.
I have to earn God's forgiveness, Jesus's forgiveness, because that will come to me. But I need to be accessible to it. I need to work on hearing it.
Hmm.
It's all in myself.
The thing I pick up on in that passage is the road part.
Mm-hmm.
Less the gate and more the road, and it is possible to lose the way. That's sort of the beginning of Dante's Inferno. I found myself in the middle of our life in a dark wood, and the right path had been lost. And so I'm focusing more on the road being, to the right place or the wrong place, rather than the narrowness or the openness of the gate itself.
Mm-hmm.
I think also, and maybe this is more because of where we live and how we live, is the many take the wide gate and the wide road. The going along with the crowd doesn't get you where you need to go.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm thinking too. Yeah.
And are we even aware when we're going along with the crowd? And can we be perhaps manipulated because we go along with the crowd? As which comes back down to the wolf in sheep's clothing, false prophets.
Great questions.
Yeah, sometimes it's easy to sin or to turn our backs or not concern ourselves with things that, I don't know, need our attention or whatever. Sometimes it's easy to be like the non-voice versus the voice. And sometimes it's hard to make right decisions. It can be lonely making the right decisions.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sounds like some folks here resonate with that, have had some experience with that loneliness of doing the right thing or making the right decision.
Echoes of the road less taken, two paths diverged in the wood.
Yeah.
Leaving aside the idea that God, doesn't, there will come a time when there is no turning back, and, God is not going to be infinitely forgiving, it appears. I'm struck by the, most of the time Jesus is preaching, the benefits of this sort of attitude. This is the way towards true happiness and fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
And, here he's, more of a warning. Most of this is not, you do this because, boy, you're just going to have a wonderful time doing it. It's because, you do it because you better be doing it.
Well, I think there's still a choice implicit here. And it's interesting because when he says the road is hard that leads to life, I hear that is sort of consistent with what you were saying about Jesus before, Fred, that he's, if Jesus says in John's gospel, I've come that they would have life and have it abundantly, right? that this is going to be about making our lives rich and full, not rich in terms of positions, but rich in terms of experience and love and meaning and purpose. I hear that that life is all of that, but it's just, it doesn't, you know, it just doesn't get poured down upon you, that Jesus is asking us to turn and live our lives differently, and therefore we will experience this abundance of life. So for me, I hear that is actually consistent. Let's just see what the Greek says. So enter through the narrow gate.
Sorry.
That's okay. I know these pop-ups. So again, you see that this is the word stenos. You know, you think of stenosis, like spinal stenosis, narrowing. This is a word that doesn't appear very often in the Gospels, just twice in Matthew and once in Luke. And, you know, again, people say, well, why does that matter? Typically, when a word isn't used very often, it is used for a very particular purpose. And so we tend to pay more attention to it. So let's just see where else it appears in Matthew. Okay.
It's all the same.
Yeah, it's all the same passage. Sorry. And
13 and 14.
and then let's see about
verses.
Luke. Yeah, Luke, it's the same story.
Okay.
Some version of the same story. So specific to the only time this particular word gets used with this narrowing is when Jesus is teaching about going through the narrow gate. Fred, you were going to say something.
Yeah, perhaps it's less about, you know, the gate and temptation and more about, you know, getting over yourself.
Can you say
that?
What do you mean by getting over yourself?
Well, I read somewhere that one of the biggest problems Muhammad had when he, you know, when Islam started to spread was that the rulers did not want to prostrate themselves. You know, they were absolutely adamant, you know, that, you know, I don't kneel for anybody.
Right.
And the Japanese tea ceremony, I have read that they have a very low door and everybody has to get down and sort of crawl through it as a,
like that.
you know, to show that, you know, you're all equal and, you know, that we're all, you know, nobody gets to just stride through life without, you know, without problems or without
bending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe this is not
helpful.
about, you know, choices of the, maybe it's about just getting over yourself, you know, being willing to admit that you aren't the center of the universe.
Well,
That's
and
certainly in there.
yeah, I think so too. And as I mentioned, that gate in Bethlehem is called, or not gate, the door is called the door of humility. And it's exactly that reason that, you know, no one goes into the Church of the Nativity, the, you know, presumed location of Jesus's birth, without bowing down, without bending down. And so I think they're definitely onto something there. That part of that narrow gate or, you know, narrow road is about learning to live more humbly. And as you would say, Fred, to get over yourself. That's helpful. So that's so that word stenos is the narrow. The gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction. Again, this is the only time this appears, which makes it a hapax legomenon. I know you love that term.
Just waiting for the chance to go to seminary, so I'll already know it.
Cocktail party, right? Just throw it out. People will be so very impressed with you. But you know, again, this is the only time it shows up. So it says, okay, what's going on here? It leads to destruction. Let's see what the destruction word is. Perishing, destruction, which consists of eternal misery in hell. So, does
Don't
anybody,
sugarcoat it.
yeah,
How is Patty, is gate, or is it, does it have any broader or metaphorical meaning?
gate of the larger sort, wall of a city, palace, town, temple, prison, gates of hell. Makes me think of what Mark was saying with the Inferno.
Right.
Access or entrance into any state. So I guess a gate is a gate. Great question. What was I gonna say? Lost it. I'll come back to it. It's right there. What was I gonna say? Okay, well. Let's see what life is. Zoe, life. The
Life.
fullness of life, essential and ethical, which belongs to God, life real and genuine, life active and vigorous. That's again, Fred, I hear that as kind of what you were describing earlier about, happiness, joy, meaning, purpose, fulfillment. So when we talk about in our own lives, entering through the narrow gate, has anyone had an experience where they have had to get over themselves, or they have had to perhaps go through the straits, or chosen to go through the straits to live a life that perhaps is different from the rest of the crowd?
No one willing to admit it.
I can't sort out of the myriad times and occasions where you make choices. And I mean, the answer is yes. And if you've got till tomorrow, I'll tell you about all of them.
Yeah, I know, right? I hear you.
I mean, the back to the metaphor earlier of going along with the crowd. I mean, how many times, each of us, I think, has at some point or another stepped away from the crowd and said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Enough is
I'm
enough.
choosing a different way.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do without that. I will do this instead, something. But just, evaluating, stepping out of the mindlessness of the crowd.
I don't think anybody who has been a teenager, which includes all of us, can say that we haven't been in that situation where opportunities presented themselves and we decided, yep, maybe to our peril, or nah, I don't think I'm going to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are you all that's a great point, Donna. Are you all familiar with the movie Dead Poets Society?
Yes.
Oh,
But
yes.
I guess the late 80s, Robin Williams, teacher at the boarding school. There's one scene, and I can try to find it later, where, it's a boys' school, and he's trying to teach the boys to think for themselves. And I don't know if you remember this scene where he has them out in a courtyard and he tells them to just start walking in a circle, just doing their own thing. And before long, they all start walking in step together. And I always think about that when we have a conversation about, stepping away or making a choice not to go with the dominant ethos at the time, that how hard that is, because there's something, we're social creatures and our inclination is to be in step, literally and figuratively, with other people. So it's hard. And I think that's what Jesus is talking about here. It's not easy to perhaps reject something that's going on, because we don't think that it's right, and that our faith tells us, no, that's not what Jesus would have me do. And I'm
I have a story like that that might illustrate the same point of how easy it is to fall into the crowd. A long time ago, I went to a meeting of the counterculture guru. His name was Ken Kesey.
oh yeah.
Yes.
And he, this is long after he was on his crazy period. He was in his period as a citizen. And he ended the meeting after about an hour of talking about his life and experience by saying, now let's all get up and do something that might bring us together. And he said, let's count backwards from 20. And he started off, and after about 17, everybody was in exact unison. They'd never practiced, they'd never been together before as a group, but all the way down to one, it was as if one voice was speaking. And he said, it's an old carnival trick, works every time. And I thought, well,
Yeah.
there is something about people that want to fall in line, and he just illustrated how it happens.
Yep, that's a great example.
I have gotten, more willing to break the mold as I got older. And one of the things I hear from Louise is, well, nobody does things like that.
And you say,
To which my response is, or everybody does it something different, to which I say, I'm not everybody.
who cares?
I'm more comfortable. I used to have a dream, a recurring dream, I don't even know how often it recurred because I didn't really pay attention to it that much. But I would be naked in a room full of people. And I didn't care. But gradually, the fact that, nobody said anything, but gradually the fact that I was different shoved me into a corner. So,
I think of this narrow gate thing. I keep going back to the quote, born again Christians. This sort of difference in state of mind and everything. And whether it's born again or whatever, but it's a change in mindset of some kind that occurs for any number of reasons. Maybe they have been an alcoholic, or maybe they abuse their children, or whatever. But for whatever reason, they have changed their state of mind. And I sort of equate that with the narrow gate. Doesn't happen to everybody. And it's not an easy thing to stay sober, or to go down the straight and narrow path. But I keep coming back to that image with the narrow gate.
I think that's really helpful, Chuck. I'm reminded a former student of mine from St. Andrews. So I think she's maybe 2 years older than my oldest. So she's like 23 or 24. And we're Facebook friends, and she posted something yesterday, and she's recently been very transparent about the fact that she's in recovery, which is amazing, at her young age. And she said yesterday, she posted, so many people ask me how I'm doing it. And she said, to the effect of, every day I make that choice, not to do this destructive behavior that was hurting me so much. And so
that's
over and over and over again, it has to be re-upped and make me think of that.
Yeah, and that the AA thing, one day at a time.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. Precisely.
Why you get the pins that celebrate, anniversaries so often.
Yeah.
Such a big deal. Fred, when you were talking about, the older you get, the less you worry about it, or I'm putting words in your mouth, but the less you care about, or the easier it is to step away. And I think that is one of the graces of age, and one hopes maturity. Going back to what Donna was saying, when we're teenagers, right? What's the dominant thing that everyone wants to fit in? And being apart from the pack is anathema. That's just the most painful experience when you're an adolescent, right? But as we age, yeah, sure, that's good, bring it on. So I do think that it's a lot easier as we mature, for all kinds of reasons. But there is some wisdom that we gain as a result of that.
You become more comfortable in your own skin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I
And
think the gruesome experiences in middle school that everybody's had are the one thing they teach you. Well, other than, you know, if you are available to learn compassion from that, that's one thing. But you do get out of the other end of it.
Mhm.
Things change. You move, you go to college, something happens, and you know, somebody stands up for you, and you realize that, I mean, that just sort of is an experience that ticks off in your brain that this has happened and I'm still alive.
Mhm. And it does get better. Yeah, I think that's really very Where do we go next? And again, we've said this before about this section of the Sermon on the Mount, that, you know, it doesn't profit us to try to find a narrative thread, because these really are, this is a series of Jesus sayings, of Jesus teachings that have been knit together in a particular way. So we can bounce around, and that's just fine. So if there's an image or an idea that really strikes you, let's run with that.
Can I just raise a detail on the good trees and the bad trees? And I'm looking at the Gideon Bible. I love staying at Marriott's on Wednesdays. And it's King James, and it says, even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. And I like the use of corrupt rather than bad, because bad is just so, it's so, I mean, you call your dog bad. I mean, bad is a very lame word. Whereas corrupt and evil are much more emphatic. It just gives me a little bit more richness in the passage.
Does Jesus think of people as being irredeemable, as being corrupt?
Well, you can be corrupt and be cured. I mean, well, I don't know about the corrupt trees, or the trees that do not, every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down. Well, that's sort of an agricultural image that another one of those.
Well, when we talk about this tree and the fruit thing, when you're looking at false prophets, and then they're bringing into, you know, a comparison with a tree that does not bear good fruit and will be cut down and thrown into a fire, there is no redeeming from burning to ash. There's nothing that can come back. So it's so final, and it's not forgiving. Do you know what I mean? Like Patty, I was just saying that when they're comparing like the false prophets to a tree that does not bear good fruit, and it will be cut down and thrown into the fire, like it's so final. Like there is no room for redemption for those I don't know, those false prophets. I mean, or whatever they are. Like, where does that go after you're thrown into a fire? You're ash. There's nothing that can come back.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think the context is important. I'm glad you went back to the false prophets, because that seems to me the key. So they come to you in sheep's clothing, so they look outwardly really attractive. They may be charismatic or powerful, and they look great, and they're telling you certain things, and you said, "Oh, that sounds interesting, and maybe I'll do what they're telling me." But the thing to watch for is sort of watch their hands. It's what are they asking you to do?
Follow the money.
What are they exactly saying you should be doing next?
Mhm.
Forget how attractive they appear. Look at what they're telling you to do. And if they're telling you stuff that doesn't look or feel right or goes against the moral law, then I don't care how attractive they are, stay away. I think that's the real message. It's not so much kill the false prophets, it's stay away.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Also, I think the fruits of the prophets. I mean, I think the comparison is that the prophet itself is the tree, and the fruit that it's producing, i.e., the behavior of the prophet's followers. That's their fruit, and that's what they're going to be judged by. Mark, you're muted.
I'm still getting noise from my bathroom, so I should just shut up. But yes, I was nodding in agreement. Yes.
I just wanted to read a note from our friend Amy Jill Levine in her Jewish Annotated New Testament, and she says that Josephus states, of course, he's the Jewish historian, first century, states that false prophets contributed to the detriment and death of many Jews during the first revolt. So, it's, as Mark is saying, be careful who you're following, be careful who you're listening to, because you could get yourself into some real trouble that way. I like when you said that, Mark, about watch their hands. Your hands on the table. We want to know what's going on. And was it you, Ellie, who was talking about preferring corrupt to bad? I had to step away. We've got plumbers. Let's just take a look at what the Greek is. Good tree bears good fruit, bad tree.
Bad tree, no biscuit.
Rotten, putrefied, corrupted, worn out, poor quality. There you go. So yeah, it's not, I hear that is not so much a moral descriptor as, it's rotting from the inside. It's putrefied flesh, which is just so a tree that has no longer can bear good fruit, if it ever did. And there's, I'm not a arborist, but it seems to me that there is some wisdom. If a tree is dying and is decaying from inside, of course we want to cut it so that it doesn't, pull valuable resources from others. So I'm not sure that we're meant to hear that thrown into the fire as the fire pit of hell. But more, it's a very practical, this is what happens when a tree has stopped producing.
Well, on the other hand, you drive through Kenwood and it's the older trees that are the most interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just meant to be an agricultural rule of thumb, and not necessarily at that point to be applied to people turning to ash.
That's what I hear as well, Donna, that it's sort of a statement of fact. Every tree that doesn't bear fruit is cut down. That's what people do.
We're just talking trees here.
Yeah, as opposed to dire warning.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Well, I would link it back to the opening paragraph that we read and the narrow gate and the choices that there are those who are headed for a dead end and those who are not. And the ones who are not are the ones that bear good fruit and so forth, either personally or communally, who knows. But I think he's carrying the meat of that metaphor on into this agricultural context, saying, that there are,
I think you can tie it even back to the one before that, the golden rule. That, all of this, the golden rule tells you how to bear good fruits, how to take the harder path and do things. So
good catch. It's interesting in our time, the business about false prophets seems to me to be overabundant in our time. And the call, and again, back to that call for discernment and stepping back far enough to see what is going on. The hands, keep the hands in sight. Yeah. I don't think we need to go far to make it apply today. By the way, I'll say a good word for thistles, artichokes.
Oh, that's true. And sometimes if you,
I'm sorry, I keep disappearing. We've got plumbers and we've got electricians all here at the same time. So please keep talking. I will be back.
no, I agree with, and sometimes, you have to work to get something valuable.
Yeah.
So, the good fruit isn't always necessarily obvious.
I was thinking that it especially would not be obvious to the people in Jesus's time who were brought up to listen to the rabbis and listen to the prophets and to take all their knowledge of right and wrong from the Hebrew scripture. So they would have no idea at all if they depart from that. If they're going to judge on a new standard, then they need these things that almost sound simplistic. In a way, the 15 and 16 and 17, they remind me of Hamlet and Polonius. Neither a borrower or a lender be. It seems so simple-minded, and we're supposed to laugh at Polonius. But if you are as simple as a child and don't have any idea of whom to follow, then you need standards like this. Judge a person by what he does. Don't judge him by how everybody's following him and how wonderful his clothes are and how big his house is and so forth.
I like also at 16, you will know them by their fruits. And just the genius of this metaphor, part of it to me is that you don't know when you plant a sapling or a grapevine, whether it's going to give you the good fruit or not. You have to keep watching. You have to keep evaluating as the plant matures and begins to bear fruit or not, or is the fruit, worth saving. And if you've ever raised anything from accidental seed, you don't know what kind of a plant you're really going to get. And you have to be ready to take that out of your orchard or your garden in order to make room for something that will.
My husband just muttered parenthood.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
Thank you,
a
Bob.
whole new bucket of worms.
Spoken like someone who has taught children for a long time.
Long
1,000
time.
or so, yeah.
Oh dear. Let me see if I can get rid of this. So where else did you go while I was gone?
We were stuck on the thistles.
Okay.
But
Or we could probably go on to those who say, Lord, Lord,
Yeah.
and I never knew you.
mhm,
That sounds pretty harsh, doesn't it?
yeah.
I don't know. The image of Jim and Tammy Baker comes to mind immediately without any difficulty at all.
Mhm.
Jerry Falwell, a bunch of others. I'm being judgmental. I understand that.
Yeah.
You need to
But I
remind-
How
think
do
this-
you obey these tenets without being somewhat judgmental?
I think this is a part of the same thing as, look at what they're doing, not what they're saying. Someone who says, I'm following the Lord, but then doesn't do anything to follow up on that, can't say, well, Lord, I listened to you. I was paying attention.
I went to
The
church.
key
I went
thing
to
is what
Bible
you do.
study.
It's your behavior, not your internal attitude, your belief. That's the key thing. I think that's what he's saying, really.
What about the people who, are honestly and in good faith, but just, don't get it? The people who
Well,
are following the prosperity gospel out of all, because they believe in it.
Do they get the same rewards as somebody else who took the narrow gate?
Well, I mean, I don't think so. Not because they are bad people, but because they didn't do, as you say, didn't do the work
Mhm.
to get to where the reward actually is.
Mhm. Well, and I
Well, it could be like in the start of the last paragraph. It's the people who hear the words but don't do them,
Mhm.
and with the emphasis on doing the will of my Father who is in
But if
heaven.
you
That's
think you are
what you
doing
got
the
to do.
will, and I hang out with some fundamentalists on occasion, as people know, who are, I think they've missed the whole point in many cases.
Mhm.
Of course, they think I'm going to hell, and when, unless I repent immediately. So
here's a question then. Are they false prophets, or are they victims of false prophets?
that's the question I'm asking.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And
Are
I,
If
they
you
the
have
bad
it,
fruit?
if you have a God, who is making these decisions and separating the sheep from the goats, he is going to have to condemn one group and maybe let another one slide because it was a good faith error. If you have a situation where there are people who, if you don't do the work, if you're never able to get over yourself, the reward was there, but you just couldn't get it. You didn't realize it was there. You didn't reach out to get it. And I think that's to a large part of what Jesus is saying.
which is
But
such a shame, right? If the abundant life is available and for whatever reason we don't choose or can't see it, can't avail ourselves of it. It's just, it's really
it
very.
is, I know, some people, some very wealthy people who I consider to be, incredibly shallow, but they're happy with their shallowness.
Mhm.
They're
So
happy
they
with their
have their
toys.
reward.
Hmm?
Yeah, they have their reward.
That's
Well,
right.
but
It's clear about that.
are they to be punished, later on for that? Or is it just the fact that they miss out on what they could be doing?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they won't be rewarded. As
Well, they won't get,
Gallery says here.
it's kind of like dieting, if you don't diet, you don't lose weight. But, maybe you're happy with that. Is there a punishment associated with, not following through?
Well, it sounds pretty straightforward to say, "Go away from me, you evildoers." Sounds like a pretty harsh rejection.
Yeah, but Matthew was, writing for the Jews. And there's Matthew is very much down on the Jews who reject Jesus.
Not as much as John is, but yeah.
Well, but Matthew is kind of down on the Jews who reject Jesus. It's kind of like Muhammad, who thought everybody would convert to monotheism 3.0. But the fact that a lot of them decided to stay with 1.0 and 2.0, he eventually, was much more dismissive of the other religions of the book.
Mm-hmm. What does it mean to do the will of my Father in heaven? We kind of gloss over that.
Oh, Patty, that's good for you. You always drag us back. Okay, what's the actual point
Yeah,
here?
you continue to make Bible study to be religious.
What am I thinking?
That's
What,
why I
what
do
is
this.
it? You know, when Jesus says this, you know, I keep thinking about that definition of pornography. You know it when you see it. Well, do you know the will of God when we see it? You know, what is the will of Jesus's Father in heaven?
Well, isn't that the 10 Commandments? Isn't that the basis for it?
Yes, but that was like God 1.0 and Jesus is God 2.0. So
Well, absolutely, absolutely.
to continue that metaphor.
Yeah.
I've made a convert.
Well, I mean, we could, one of the things, the 10 Commandments in many, or in whichever version, I mean, a lot of that is the negative. Don't do these things, don't do that things. And I think the will of God is more than just the avoiding the bad stuff.
Mhm. And that's why he was just being so basic, because here's where we start. And no, you didn't get that. And then no, Jesus comes. So
here's what you got to do to survive as a people. You know, remember your God, treat your parents well. I thought this was the freebie that was thrown in. And then the rest of this is here's how you live together.
Yeah. I mean, that's the foundation.
Yes.
Everything builds from that.
Yeah, and I think that I think Jesus said he didn't come to abolish the law. He came, to fulfill it. I suppose fulfilling it means explicating it in some other understandable way.
And
I'd add the Beatitudes to the things that are lawful and not keeping them as lawless. I mean, it's an addition.
Yeah.
Yes.
10 Commandments, but it's not inconsistent with it.
Yeah.
I'm always suspicious of people that know the will of God.
You just haven't
Good.
listened to me enough.
Then you are saved.
Well, I mean, you're
got the
supposed
answers,
to do
Fred.
this,
Follow
but
me.
there are so many people out there telling you exactly what the will of God is. And, the distressing thing is they don't all agree.
But
well, judge them by their fruits. That's the answer.
And here's the other thing. Who is the one saying this in this case? It's Jesus. So, to me, Jesus has a leg up on other yeah. So I'm more inclined to listen to him. And when he describes and he embodies and lives out what it means to do the will of my Father in heaven, I'm thinking about, forgiveness, about, turning the other cheek, about loving people who might be on the margins, who the society might say, no, you should just ignore, kissing the leper kind of thing. I think we do get a picture of what God's will is according to Jesus. And to Mark's point about the Beatitudes, even though it's likely that Jesus didn't say these teachings, deliver these sayings, these teachings in this order, Matthew has edited them together for a particular reason. And so it's at the end of this first book of the Gospel of Matthew, the end of these teachings, that, so you can sort of see Matthew setting this up for Jesus to say, okay, this is what I've just shown you. And that's inclusive of the Beatitudes. So what about this hearers and doers? And of course, for those of us who were together when we read the Epistle of James, maybe you hear some resonances there. And I'm looking at you, Fred Smoke, because I know you, James.
I think James had it right.
So how do you hear then this paragraph? What do you make of this? Everyone who hears these words and acts on them will be like a wise man. Everyone who hears these words and does not act on them will be like a foolish man.
It's just another way of, the sower parable.
Hmm.
You know, if you hear them, and you know, if you go to church on Sundays and you're a real son of a bitch the rest of the week,
And maybe
Yeah.
you're missing something.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, the key thing here is that, and this excludes a lot if you take it seriously.
Mhm.
This is not a religion of contemplation and meditation and inwardness where you find salvation by withdrawing into yourself. It's a religion of action. It's a religion of behavior. And he's calling us to behave in a certain way in the world, not to withdraw from it and go into yourself. And that's not what all religions do. Many of them, and even some Christian versions, take the opposite tack and say, no, you find God inside, not in the everyday world. This is a very
be in
different
the
way
world
of
but not
setting
of
it
the
up.
world.
Mhm.
I keep coming back to the to the thought that you'll be known by your fruits.
Mhm.
And when I want to see things, the teachings of Jesus was, I don't think he knew about these people, but he was echoing people who had come before him,
Mhm.
who had many of these same ideas, who had many of these same principles, and advocated for loving your neighbor, for doing the right thing. And if I want to know what God is thinking, I'm going to look to to worldwide principles to see if they're echoed other places.
Didn't we read a bunch of this in Isaiah last Sunday about justice and
Yes.
untying the yoke and walking humbly with God? I mean,
Mhm.
those are found throughout, but I think they become the central focus of Jesus's teaching.
And he demonstrates what that looks like, at a very practical level. I think, throughout the Gospels, as we read and reflect on these vignettes, right? When Jesus encounters other people, when he teaches, when he heals, when he calls his disciples, that's, when you're using the 2.0 language, that's really, explaining, okay, how do we make this concrete in the world? What does it mean to walk humbly with our God? Well, get over yourself, to use Fred's expression, and this is what that looks like. Donna, you were going to say something, and I want to make sure you get the floor.
Well, I was going to say that I looked to verse 28 and that the crowds were astounded. And I mean, I think while you were gone, I said some of this sounds very simplistic. And then I was thinking of Polonius's speech in Hamlet, which we were supposed to laugh at. But this is all new stuff for them, evidently, if they were astounded.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a mark of how different this was from the conservative teaching that they were used to.
Mm-hmm.
I think the astonishment came from Jesus saying, as if he were speaking for God.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of one with
well,
authority.
Speaking
Yeah.
of one with authority who was able to speak for God, the scribes and the Pharisees would always have to reference somebody else
Mm-hmm.
to
I
you
feel
know.
like he's really calling out certain kinds of people. I mean, there's a lot of, like, earlier in the chapters about forgiveness and we're going to forgive. And these are more like things that he's saying, if you don't change, you will pay. Like, there is not forgiveness built into these sentences. These sentences are, this is the type of thing, your house will fall, and we can take them literally, figuratively, however we want to talk about that. But these are bad things that are going to happen for these, however many there are. How many are there? Like 3, like the hearers and the doers, the self-deception, and then, I don't know, whatever, the wolves in sheep's clothes, like false prophets. These are the things that are very wrong. And I guess maybe they had been prescribed the 10 Commandments before, and they adjusted it to fit into their world. But this gets a lot more specific about what he's talking about.
I
And
have
what does
to
this mean in
step
everyday
away.
life?
Okay.
Yeah.
I have another commitment.
Hi, Fred.
It has been a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure. So next week we'll start with chapter 8. I just want to very quickly, because I know we're over time, say in response to what Kim said, it's the business, whether we take the house falling literally or figuratively, why does the house fall? Does it fall because God smites it and says, thou shalt have no house? Or does it fall because it's constructed on a poor foundation?
Bad choice.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, that's what's always striking to me. It's not so, I don't hear in that. And I very possibly am wrong about this, but I don't hear it as punishment, but rather, okay, if you do this dumb thing, if you set your hopes on X, on a Ponzi scheme, you're going to wind up with. And so, it seems to me that Jesus is offering, a different kind of foundation.
Like natural consequences are going to happen. Yeah.
Because as Ray said, you made a really bad choice where to build that house. You build a house on the beach, you shouldn't be surprised if it gets washed away in a hurricane, and it's not nice for people to say, well, duh, but
Right.
there is something to that. So again, there's this practical wisdom that we hear in
I want to just go back. I heard something in Donna's comment that or triggered something. Is it is an attack on the religious establishment of the day. That is astounding. And that's to put it in the vernacular, that's eventually what got him nailed.
I'm starting to call them false prophets.
Yeah.
Who are you calling a false prophet here now?
Yeah, that's incendiary language, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we follow the ritual, burn enough incense.
But Patty, if you scroll up, like to the one before, like that concerning self-deception, like when he's saying, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And then he's saying, like, I will declare to them, I never knew you. Go away from me. You behave lawlessly. Not that it's not meant as a punishment. It might just be meant as like, we are not intimate. You haven't behaved that way. But it's interesting to me because he's really talking about what types of people, he sees in that society that he thinks are not going down that right path and are not doing well. He's calling out very specific types of, I don't know, issues and actions.
And clearly he does see it happening because he wouldn't be teaching against it, right? If he weren't. Yeah, and prophesying in your name. It's like, who are you to prophesy in my name? Right. And I hear him really turning his back. And Jesus very rarely turns his back on people, but he's turning his back because they're claiming something that is not true and authentic and in line with who he is and what he's teaching and what God wants for God's people.
Well, there's a parallel to it.
Yes.
In one of Paul's epistles about the magician with the slave girl and all. Again, these are trading on the Jesus brand and falsely.
I like that, trading on the Jesus brand. Yeah, it's a knockoff. Yeah. All right, well, I know we're over time. Does anyone have any last thoughts about the Sermon on the Mount? And obviously, we're not leaving it behind because the rest of the gospel is built on this foundation that Matthew sets out for Jesus's teaching. But before we sign off today, does anyone have any last words they want to share?
Have a great week.
Yes, those are good
Okay.
words. All right, so Chuck, you'll still be around next week, right? It's the following.
Yes, yeah, we have one more week here.
All right, good. So we will
Good.
send you off on Sunday with in style.
Thank you.
And then we'll get to see you for Bible study. So that's
All
good.
right, good.
It'll be nice.
All right,
Bye,
dear,
everybody.
Bye all.
thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good as always. Thank you.